This episode is brought to you by NVeedHemp.com. Enveed has been my choice for my CBD needs for almost a year now, and I can't begin to tell you how it has improved my life. They come in 3 formulas: Clarity, Relief, and Relax. I take a Clarity drop in the morning with my coffee to get me focused, then a drop of Relief for my aches and pains and inflammation after a run or a workout. Then I do a drop of the Relax before I go to bed to help me sleep. I've gotten some of the best sleep that I've had in years, and now with my Whoop band, my recovery band, I can prove it. And now they've come out with a new mixture called Immunity, which we all need to stave off COVID-19. The Immunity Boost is a mixture of turmeric, grapefruit extract, elderberry, licorice root, and vitamin C, which we all could use a little bit more, I'm sure. I just got my first shipment in and took my first drop this morning. They come in drops, which is my choice, a tincture, roll-ons for those aches and pains, and then also gummies, which I think a lot of people out there use the gummies. So you can get it however you choose. So go place your order today. Go to NVeedHemp.com and use the code GURU20 for a 20% discount for life. CBD is a great supplement to keep you healthy and safe during these crazy times. So let's get to this week's episode. This episode of the Golf Guru Show is sponsored by Straight Down Golf Apparel. I am very excited to announce that I have become a brand ambassador for Straight Down. Thank you so much for Mike Rowley and the team for inviting me into this family. And I am very excited to start to share the mission that I feel very strongly about. As Mike Rowley founded this Straight Down company in 1989, which started as a small t-shirt company, but shortly grew into a full-range golf and lifestyle apparel brand that is now worn by some of the top athletes in the industry and now by the Guru, which I'm super, super excited about. His love of golf translates into the products, and this stuff is awesome. I can't wait to share some of the stuff on Instagram and the videos I'm doing for Swing U and with all of you. So if you want to know more about this brand, go to straightdown.com and check it out. So let's get to this week's episode with Matt Wilson.
It's not what you know, it's what you can prove.
You know how to cut to the core of me, Baxter. You're so wise. You're like a miniature Buddha, covered in hair.
I want to become a guru so girls will like me. Then I will like myself.
Now, before we do this, let's go over the ground rules. Rule number 1, no touching of the hair or face.
Of course.
And that's it! Now let's do this!
What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Golf Guru Show. I am Jason Sutton, and I am the Guru, where it is my mission to interview the top golf instruction minds in the business and high performers in all fields of study. Break them down, get them to share all their stories, best practices, and information that have made them successful, and then share it with all of you so we can grow together as coaches and as human beings. Thank you all out there for your support of the podcast. And make sure you download this episode and all the previous episodes of the Golf Guru Show and hit that purple subscribe button so you don't miss any future shows that will be coming your way. My guest on this episode is Mr. Matt Wilson. Matt is originally from Toronto, Canada, and is now the new Director of Instruction at Balderstraw Country Club in New Jersey. He is a brilliant and talented coach, and I think you're going to enjoy this awesome conversation that we had. So without further ado, let's get to my interview with my friend, Matt Wilson. Enjoy. Matt Wilson, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Officially.
Appreciate you having me on, Jason. This will be good.
It's been a while coming and reconnected with you over quarantine, which has been nice. And we've had a few chats. I know you've started a new job. I know that's keeping you busy. What else have you been doing prior to that?
Well, it was interesting. So the break or the quarantine, lockdown, whatever we want to call it, gave me a lot of time to be at home, which was fantastic because, since my children, it's been a pretty wild ride for me since 2017 when I came back to Canada, just off the golf course and personally more than more than anything, which combined with a very, very busy professional situation with a lot of travel, it was the first time I was really at home for more than 2 weeks at a time for 3 years. And, my kids just turned 2 in May. So getting a really long, intensive period with them at home and my wife was a really nice breath of fresh air for me, and the opportunity to take some time between starting here at Baltusrol and finishing with Golf Canada really sort of just think and reevaluate in terms of, what I want the next chapter in my career to look like, both professionally and more probably importantly personally. And then on the professional side, really start digging into, okay, I've been doing this for a while now. What do I believe in? And I'm trying to really, really, really flesh that out.
Sure.
And I'm still not even close to done that process, but
yeah, I've heard that a lot from the people that I've talked to and connected with, when we're on lockdown. It's like, it's a good opportunity to catch up with old friends and people that we don't get to talk to enough.
No doubt.
We're out teaching all day. But I think this is going to be a great segue, because I just had Ian Highfield on this week as well. And I know you guys share some similar philosophies on coaching and practice, and I want to dig into that. But I want to start with sort of the beginning, and a question that I got from one of our mutual friends is he wanted me to ask you how you learned about non-linear pedagogy.
Hello, Corey.
You can tell who that was, right?
Yeah, it's actually a pretty funny story. How I learned about nonlinear pedagogy. I guess it's more of a backdoor sort of segue to really the impetus toward all this. So
that's right. That's why I thought it was a good place to start.
Yeah, it's a great place to start. So I'm very fortunate in that I have an extremely bright wife. She is brilliant, and so her background is in kinesiology. She studied at on the undergraduate program at the University of Waterloo with Stu McGill, and kind of all that. Everything that sort of comes with that program. It's widely regarded as one of the better kinesiology programs in the country. And so when I decided to get into coaching, she took me aside and said, hey, look, you're probably going to want to go through a lot of my undergraduate work. I have all my notes, all my binders, all my textbooks. Here's motor learning and motor control, right to this would probably be a nice place for you to start. And so it's kind of been interesting. So kind of how I learned about nonlinear pedagogy would oddly enough be through my wife initially, and then just being extremely interested in people and how they learn and how they acquire things, and then ultimately how they perform. And, I had a very interesting childhood in that my parents were concert musicians. They both played in the Toronto Symphony Orchestra for whatever. They started there and retired there. They never left, and very, very accomplished musicians. My mother was playing with the Seattle Symphony when she was 13, 14 years old. I graduated from the music school at USC. My dad went to Juilliard, all that jazz. So they're very, very high performers and kind of brought up in that type of household. And so human performance was something I've always been extremely interested in. And consequently, motor learning and motor control resonated with me very, very early. So that's kind of how I got into it. And then Corey, that's his favorite word. So
I was gonna say, like, just pronouncing it is not often easy.
Oh yeah,
maybe define it for the listeners out there first, and then I've got some questions about your parents as well, because I think that's interesting as well as your sort of upbringing.
Sure. So I think just from, again, 40,000 foot view, I think what underpins nonlinear pedagogy is really that learning is somewhat of an erratic process. And that would be the easiest way that I would sort of encapsulate it in one thing. And so when you look at learning and development through that lens, it tends to take on a very different, I don't want to say process, but process, I guess, maybe is the right way to do it, where a little more variability is embraced, and exploration is probably a little more of a focal point, as opposed to doing things within very, very tight margins right off the bat. But it's generally a viewpoint of somewhat of an erratic nature, or very unpredictable nature of learning.
So it's almost basically a method of self-guided learning, would that be fair?
I would say, I don't know if that's fair, but I think there's elements of nonlinear pedagogy in self-guided learning.
Gotcha.
But so maybe, I guess I don't really know, but I wouldn't necessarily say that self-guided learning is a form of nonlinear pedagogy. I just think the nonlinear nature of learning sort of underpins all kind of learning methods.
Gotcha.
Would be,
yeah.
It's more of a foundational philosophy, I think, is
right. All right. So back to your upbringing, your childhood. Obviously, you were in a household of high performers, and with your mom and dad being in the music part of it. What did you learn from them that maybe you carried into your coaching, or sort of helped you form some of your, maybe even your work ethic or some of your thoughts in your career now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's because I think about it all the time. And so my mom passed away in 2018. And so there's been a lot of sort of reflection there in terms of what do I have an older sister, and she would say she's more like my dad, and I'm very much more like my mother. But, I think first and foremost, work ethic was always something that was really never really spoken about in our house, but modeled very, very well. And so it was never about working hard. It was finding things you enjoy doing and immersing yourself in it. My dad would probably be the more consummate grinder, someone who is very regimented, a very disciplined practicer, excruciatingly high standards. There'd be many days that I can remember where I'd be taking the trash out on a Tuesday or Wednesday, and there'd be broken music stands because he would just go postal on some of these music stands because he just wasn't satisfied with the quality of his work. Whereas, my mother very much, she's a third generation professional cellist. So for her, I don't want to say it came easier to her, but she definitely didn't necessarily spend the time. But I would say, when she made time to practice, it was extremely deliberate. And one of the things that I remember, because my room in the house was next to my mother's and my father's practice room, it was kind of right there. And every time she'd practice, she would always start with scales. This is someone who's a professional cellist.
Yeah.
Literally the most basic stuff. And even now when I reflect on it more and more and more, you'd never hear her finish something that wasn't done perfectly. She'd stop if it wasn't well done, and she would make the corrections, so on and so forth. And she also taught quite a bit too. And, I think one of the big things she always had for her students were extremely high expectations. And she was pretty blunt, far more blunt than I maybe necessarily feel comfortable being. But she would always ask, she'd have the person play, and she would just stop them and say, "You haven't practiced."
Bust them.
Just bust them. And, I don't really have that. But so I think from just an overall thematic standpoint, what I really, really took from sort of my upbringing was just tireless work ethic from my dad, excruciatingly high standards, which is both good and bad. And then from my mom, I would say it was care in the process of what you're doing. And those are sort of three pillars that I like to think are foundational to my sort of behavior as a coach. And then from just a program standpoint, the values that would be sort of underpinning of that.
Did they ever introduce you to music? Did you ever think about going down that road? Did you play any instruments when you were younger?
Yeah, music was a non-negotiable, but I was a pretty active child. And so sitting still and like precision, and it wasn't really my cup of tea. Like I needed to run around. And it's sad, and I don't like to admit it, but with music, I worked as hard as I needed. I pushed myself insofar as I could progress without practice. So I reached a level that I just wasn't willing to put in the time. And consequently, I never really did anything with music, and I really don't have much to say other than, yeah, tried it. It was kind of mandatory, but never really went anywhere with it.
What instrument was it?
Oh man, there are a bunch.
Oh, so you did a lot.
Piano was first. That was really not my favorite. My mom would sit there next to me, supervising me practice. I'd just start whacking the keys like wham, 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 just sort of in protest, and I would drive her nuts, and she would give up. And I tried trumpet for a little bit. My grandfather was a very good trumpeter as well. That's kind of where that idea came from, but that one failed. That one was just really, really hard. And again, I didn't love it enough to stick with it. And so I can certainly appreciate people who get frustrated with golf.
I was about to say that has to give you an appreciation for some of the
people trying to learn
we
stuff.
coach. Yeah, trying to learn a new skill or how hard golf is. I don't know. I can't equate it. I played piano a little bit when I was a kid, but didn't stay with it. But well, take us back to the beginning and kind of like through your career and how you got to where you are today. Give us a little lineage before we kind of get into some of the coaching stuff that I want to talk about.
Played in college. I should say I got a late start to golf. I was at a hockey training camp, and I might have been 13 years old at the time. And they said, we got to pick a dryland activity. And I wanted to find the easiest, lowest stress thing that I could possibly find because it was a pretty grueling camp. So I picked golf. And I was hooked instantly. I was pretty competent. Like I could hit it reasonably solid, get it in the air, and move it a decent distance right off the bat. And I love the fact that, I love the fact it was non-contact. I was not a big kid. And so I just kind of enjoyed it. And I would go to the driving range every now and then with my dad. He would have just started playing golf at that training camp as well. Despite my grandfather being a very good player. He was never introduced to the game. And so I kept playing it as a very, very secondary sport, probably until I was 15 years old. And again, like at my size, I was never going to progress any further in hockey. I really was not enjoying it. And so I just said, you know what, I'm just going to play golf. And so I got a job picking balls in the wintertime at a dome. And I would take we grew up very much in downtown Toronto. I would get my golf bag, take the streetcar right to the middle of the financial district, then kind of just walk down right to Queens Quay where the dome was, and I would sit there and practice all night, and then my parents would pick me up after their concerts. And so I went from shooting about 110 to about 79 in 1 year.
Nice.
So, and so I progressed very, very quickly.
Any coaching in that piece, or was it just self-discovery? And
no, there was a guy there named Mark Evershed at the Golf Dome.
Know that name well.
Yeah, he was there, and he had a teaching staff there, and I worked with one of the staff members. His name is Terry, and he was very, very helpful. He would kind of be one of my first teachers, and then I progressed pretty quickly, and then there was a really good coach at the club just down the street from where I grew up playing, and his name is Dave Woods. He's phenomenal, very impactful for me, and worked with a ton of great players at the time, and got involved with him thereafter. And obviously my progression wasn't as fast after kind of those first couple of years in the game, but he was pretty instrumental in laying the foundation for some pretty good habits. So I went to college. I was a fringe college player at best. Started playing pretty well, sort of my late junior year, made the all-conference team, and then fall senior year, and then figured I needed to get better and started jumped on the internet, tried to figure stuff out myself, and decided not to listen to my coach, which was really stupid. And then eventually started playing really, really poorly and left the game entirely for a brief moment in time after school, and got a job and just started getting back into the game slowly. And then eventually to the point where I said, I'd like to play. So tried to play and quickly realized I was no good. And then got involved with the PGA and got a job down in down in Texas, which kind of coincided with my first level 1 PGA seminar. Met Paul Shep there, and he was talking about mentorship. I'm like, this looks important. So I'm going to ask this guy what I should do. So I went right up to him and said, hey, look, my name's Matt. This is where I live. This is my story. This is what I want to do. What do you think? And he says, oh, yeah, call this guy Cameron. He's young. No one's ever heard of him.
Cameron McCormick.
Yeah, but he's great. And so as soon as I got back, I emailed him and just eventually went to go see him every single day that I possibly could for just shy of a year there. And then went back, worked for Henry Brunton in Toronto, and then went down to the Lincoln Country Club in California, which was a great spot to kind of do my own thing, which was trial by fire. My boss there is still one of my best friends. He's great, amazing club, great membership. Got involved with the Stanford University men's team while I was down there, and then did some stuff with Golf Canada, and then eventually moved back full time with Golf Canada, and then now here at Baltusrol. But that's kind of what I've done. But it's really funny when I look back at it. Like in grade 10, we had to do a careers class, and we had to do a big project on something we might want to do as a career. And I picked a golf professional, believe it or not.
Really?
Yeah. And specifically, like, I looked at David Ledbetter.
I was going to say, who inspired that answer?
Yeah, I don't know. I enjoyed learning golf. And I think I might have just like Googled a bunch of stuff and just totally stumbled on it by dumb luck. And yeah, I still have that actual Bristol board that I made in 10th grade.
That's cool.
Yeah, my mom kept it.
So you and Corey started collaborating. We talked about that a little bit. That's really the first time that I kind of heard about you, because I was friends with Corey.
Yeah.
That's when you were in California, correct?
Yeah.
So
I met Corey through Cameron.
Right. I figured that. Yeah.
A couple years prior, and he had done a lot of stuff with Rick Jensen and Henry. And so Corey and I would communicate often. And then we, I've always stayed in touch, and we were pretty fast friends. He's a great guy.
Yes.
And we went up to Omaha to spend some time with James Seekman, and we were sitting at a fine establishment having a couple beverages. And at this time, like, he had kind of not, like, Curious Coaches was kind of meddling a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I said, man, like, do you want to do this together? And he's like, yes, I do. And so I'm just was the lucky guy to be able to sort of piggyback on his amazing platform that he had, and his creativity is unbelievable. Something I certainly wish I had. And kind of the rest is history with that. And that turned into a bunch of speaking engagements, which was amazing. We presented together at the Golf Magazine Top 100 Teachers Summit, which was our very first ever presentation. I'd never presented publicly, and I don't think Corey had either. I think we did Andrew Rice's coach camp, and then we did the World Scientific Congress of Golf in Scotland, which was really cool. And then that all turned into a book.
And I think it like I was talking about earlier with game like training, there's a lot of similarities, I think, in what you guys were talking about and how people practice. And so we can start with a few of your ideas, and then I want to get into just what you think your philosophy is. And I think a lot of this stuff holds up nicely with how we're sort of transitioning and to trying to transfer skills, right, from the range to the golf course. I know your 3 keys, or one of your 3 keys in the book, I read it when it first came out, was deliberate practice, representative learning, and then motivation. So can you kind of go through those 3 areas and give us sort of a synopsis of really the book, and then what does it mean to you now?
Yeah, I think the last question there is really the one that I'm really interested in chatting about. And it's interesting. I mean, our belief systems and ideas, they generally lie on a spectrum and there's polar opposites and
correct
and whatnot. And I would say, I think I probably lie somewhere in the middle now, but I think that's because generally speaking, I've got more experience, so on and so so forth. But I do think those three tenets are extremely, extremely relevant. So deliberate practice, and it's a tricky thing, but I would maybe rephrase it in terms of incredibly mindful practice. And being very, very intentional about what you're doing, and ensuring that that it's well structured insofar as, if I'm working on technique, do I have my evidence of correctness? Where's my feedback? Where's my green check mark? The brain can learn anything. It's a fascinating organ, and whether or not it's right or wrong, it's going to do the best thing, or it's going to do what it sees as the best way to achieve the task. And so when it comes to task achievement in the terms of golf, that's trying to apply the club head on the ball such that it's struck solidly and flies a target. And so in the absence of really explicit knowledge or some guidance as to what the most optimal pattern is for that individual, it can kind of be left to run amok, which is why we see what we see every day, and which is why we also see some people with extremely unique motions perform at an extremely high level. Optimal is somewhat of an individual based term. And so just having some feedback, and just from a technical standpoint in terms of evidence of correctness, from a more skill-based standpoint, is there a relevant challenge point insofar as, is what I'm doing too easy? Is what I'm doing too hard? And even a level deeper than that is based on what it is that I am trying to do, i.e. advance my skills or prepare for a competition.
Learning versus performance is like...
Yeah, that challenge is going to vary. So I would say deliberate is being super mindful in terms of what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it.
Right.
And then ensuring that the necessary feedback loops are in place such that you get the outcome that you're looking for, whether or not that's skill advancement or just some visual representation of readiness. From a representative learning design, again, context is so important in terms of motor recall and the ability to learn in a way, whether that's where you place your attention or the actual physical environment that you're performing in, where there's congruency between that training context and the performance context. That tends to be a condition wherein there'll be some pretty nice transfer. And so ensuring that there's something, that's something I do believe in, but it becomes trickier and trickier. I always go back and forth. Well, like, why don't you just play golf?
Yeah.
And so that's when I still maybe struggle with how to optimize that piece of it. What is the value of representative practice greater than playing holes? Don't know.
Yeah.
And it's interesting on that. And you talk to a lot of people and you listen to a lot of these interviews that Cam and Corey are doing with guys like Justin Thomas, Jordan Spieth, all the great players. And all that you hear them say is, yeah, I just played a ton. I practiced a little, played a ton. And you wonder if that's where all the representative learning happened, or if that context is why they perform so well. But you see average golfers who play all the time and don't practice. And
there's got to be a blend, right? I mean, there has to be skills build first, and then the playing piece, I think, takes over, and it seems to work. So there's got to be somewhere in the middle, like you said.
Yeah, there's no right way to eat a Reese's.
Yeah. Got to be for what's good for the individual, obviously, and that's where us coaches come in.
Yeah, and I would say that I don't have a firm answer on what that is. All we have are best guesses.
Yeah, I don't think anybody does. I mean, but it's good to hear, and I think you guys were sort of ahead of the curve there as far as what you were the message you were trying to put out. And we don't have to dig into the book, but I mean, I was curious also about, like, where did you get your research? Like, what were your materials? What books did you read? You mentioned Dave Seekman. Like some of the highlights of like what
my educational journey.
Exactly.
Sure. So I spent a lot of time early in my career shadowing Cam, which was great. I got to work for Henry, which was phenomenal. He's a brilliant guy, and he gave me a lot of creative space and a lot of autonomy to learn, which was phenomenal. I screwed up a ton, and he was always super good about it. And I really learned quite a bit from him, a lot on a number of fronts. And then when I got to California, obviously hanging around more with Corey, and being in the Bay Area was phenomenal. Spent a lot of time around Seekman. Went up to see him in Omaha, and then had him down to do clinics a couple times, which was great. What else did I do? I've just spent a lot of time just having conversations. If I didn't really know the answer to something, guys like Mark Blackburn have been extremely
Just
kind.
won PGA National Team of the Year, by the way.
Well deserved.
Yeah, absolutely.
Top shelf guy. So being able to have a network of people like Mark, like Cam, Mark Bowl recently, and then the entire coaching staff with Golf Canada, Derek Ingram, Tristan Mullally, Robert Ratcliffe, all the guys that I work with there were great. We had a nice community of coaches, and then some of the other coaches that I met in Canada have been great. Scott Cowks is one of those guys whose brain I like to pick, and the Ontario provincial coach Reggie Millage is a great guy, amazing player, and a really nice golf mind. And then even just players that I've been around too, like at Stanford, Maverick was on that team, and he was the number one ranked amateur in the world at the time. And just seeing the way he would go about it and think through the game was massive learning for me. Conrad Ray, again, just a really smart guy. A kid I worked with and still do. He plays at USC, and Chris Zambri is another guy who.
Yeah, that's the kid that you shared with me when we were in the chat, right? Yeah, very interesting.
Interesting story there.
Yeah, good story.
And he's another great golf brain that I've been fortunate to pick. And so I would say it's a smorgasbord and a bunch of seminars and stuff. And then I went to graduate school at the University of British Columbia in their kinesiology department.
Yeah. What did you learn when you're in post grad? That was another follow-up question that I forgot to ask. What's the takeaway? So the
master's degree program was in high performance coaching and technical leadership. Technical leadership is more of a Canadian sports system term in terms of the actual physical management of a high performance program and being able to oversee and develop a quadrennial plan. So basically, how to gear up for an Olympic Games and all sort of the support pieces that go into a national high performance program. So that was a lot. I would say that a lot of that was leadership based, coaching effectiveness, research methods was actually probably the most interesting course that I took because you learn to actually read research and be able to critically evaluate it insofar as, okay, what can actually be concluded from this, which is, I think, a really...
Any highlights in that part of it that you can share?
Honestly, it was a while ago.
I said you're brushing over the stuff so fast. There's a lot of to be gleaned, I think, in what you're saying. Like,
yeah,
a little more details would be great.
I really do think learning to read research and being able to understand how studies are designed and then executed really helps you see what level of validity the conclusions stemming from it have. And I think that would be, it's the golf industry and teaching and coaching especially it's a wonderful industry. There's a lot of people striving and there's a lot of people trying to figure out stuff because it's a complicated game. It's really difficult. It's an amazingly graceful and complex movement, and people want to know how to do it and want to do it better. And so there's this, I don't want to call it a race, but it's this pursuit of the answer.
Yeah, the Alpha Wars. So how involved are you in the Alpha Wars? And
I can barely spell alpha. So
I know you're not going to answer that.
No, and truthfully, I don't really pay attention to it. I don't even know who's involved. Like, I'm legitimately saying that. And so, but just being able to read an article, understand the study design, and then take the conclusions for what they are is something that's important. And it's just, there's research and then there's inquiry. And I like to kind of divide those. I think in golf instruction, we do a lot of inquiry, not a ton of research. Research is like how many people have whose research has gone through university ethics? None, or very few, I should say. And so I think I have a deeper respect for the academic process, and going through that program, and just learned a lot about how to critically evaluate research, which was helpful. And even if you look at just something so simple as internal external focus, and you look at some of the research that has been done in chipping tasks, and you look at the instruction that was provided for the internal focus group, and it's stuff like you'd never tell anyone to do. Like you would never tell anyone to do it. And so like no wonder there's a difference in effect. Like it's just like you would chip without moving your wrist, which is like impossible.
Right.
You want to keep your wrist locked versus, just think about where you want the ball to land. Like which person's going to chip better?
Yeah. I mean, the intention is a big, big thing, I think, that we often overlook. And that's funny you say that, because that's something that I've been really, really curious about, is the internal external focus and how we got our students into change. Right. I mean, it's just, it's part of our job. And a lot of times if somebody's on looking, some of the things that we'll say to our students will be like, what? Are you serious? I'm like, well, watch what happens. It's amazing.
Yeah. And, but just being able to look at it from a study design and then, okay, well then, I think the decks are stacked in this favor. But I mean, that's one area where like the body of research is so big that it's extremely compelling. But I mean, these are just some of the studies that are done, and you just look at them a little more critically. But I mean, attention's pretty powerful, for sure.
So how, with all the stuff that you've learned over the years and your journeys and your mentors, and you've come to I think one of the best jobs in America, like how would you describe your teaching philosophy or your framework now? Like, what do you share? What are you going to share with your staff? And I'm going to lead that into how are we going to help other coaches sort of develop their path?
What does my framework look like? That's a great question. So I think philosophically, right, first and foremost, it's about the person in front of us, whether that's a young junior, a senior lady, a middle-aged 10 handicapper. Ultimately, their goal orientation is going to dictate a lot. And the simple question of the 100% of the time and energy that you pour into golf, what percentage of that is play? What percentage of that is practice? And the answer to that question kind of guides the conversation. So I think just from a foundational philosophical perspective, it's really, from a coaching standpoint, we're really part of the player's ecosystem. And just generally speaking, from a purely philosophical standpoint, just in the way I see things, I generally, again, believe that every single person who picks up a golf club is trying to hit the ball solid and straight, and uses their existing knowledge to coordinate their body to achieve that task. And so I look a lot, I ask a lot of questions about existing concepts, because their motor history is going to be so influential on how they move that golf club.
Right.
And then from there, I really look at how the club head moves in space and how the club face orients itself in space, or how the golfer orients the club face in space, because I truly believe that generally speaking, people coordinate their movements based on that. And so looking at unique ways to get them to maneuver the club a little bit differently in space and time, I feel helps maintain a little more external focus, which generally helps the club golfer pretty significantly, as does the striving golfer. And so to me, I break it down more in terms of there's people that you instruct that are coming for kind of very short-term solutions, don't like have very, very modest goals that are generally short-term based.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a much different process than, look, I have a big goal and this is really important to me. And so I am handing this over to you to shepherd me through that process.
More long-term students, which is what we typically want. At least I do.
Yeah. And that's, I think my philosophy and my work history aligns more in that space where I generally just strive to surround myself with people who know a lot more and have a lot more experience to help me come up with the best plan to execute for that player.
Yeah, I know, and that leads me into, I know you've consulted and collaborated with Mark Bull, who I just had on the podcast, and thank you for connecting us because he was a fantastic interview. What are some of the things or takeaways that you've learned from Mark and how you use them in your coaching? I mean, I think I'm kind of the same way with like a John Sinclair that's given me some really nice concepts of how things work and how I can change what we all try to teach, which is club face and path and sweet spot control and all the stuff. So it's like, can you tell us anything that you've gleaned from Dr. Bull that would help the listeners?
It's a good question. I'm not sure I can put my hand or my finger on just one thing. I think what I really appreciate about Mark is, and I should say, and maybe this is why I struggle to answer the question, is so I brought someone to him who, I really wasn't sure what direction to go to. And, injury history, exceptional iron play, horrific driving. I had an idea as to why. Just delivers no loft and hits up on it. So he delivers 0 spin loft and really struggles with flat-faced clubs. And, has always had some pretty pronounced movements that have always just been part of his kind of thumbprint and his fingerprint, like an eye line that would go so far behind the ball, I'd be looking at his trail foot. It would not even see impact. But be able to control the ball and the club face reasonably well. But again, wrist surgery at 17, just crazy stuff. For someone who hadn't even put that much volume on it too. So, there's probably something faulty there from a movement standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
But the solution he gave this player was just, I wouldn't have even ever suggested it, ever, never in a million years would I suggest that he do this, because I would have thought, based on what I've read, what I've consumed, and this is where I get back to inquiry versus research.
Yeah.
Based on the inquiry and some of the preferences and matchups and so on and so forth that people communicate, I would never in a million years have suggested this. And he's just like, oh no, he needs to do this because this tissue is connected here, and that's why his eyes and his head move here. Just do this, you'll be fine. And kudos to the kid who bought into it. Because I'm sitting there during the session, I'm like, oh my God, what is about to happen? And
so what was it specifically? Like, what do you remember?
Yeah, it was how his pelvis moved, right?
Yeah.
So he's someone who had a lot of secondary axis tilt, a lot of eye line counter rotation to his his head would rotate counter to his thorax. Mm-hmm. Tons of handle lean. And a lot of kind of late supination of the lead arm, but with he just had crazy wrist movements, just extreme ranges, compresses the snot out of it, but flat face clubs, it's goes everywhere. And so basically a lot of again, I'm going to butcher this because I'm not an expert on the subject area, but a lot of the fascial trains or the lines of fascia that run through the body, specifically, there's some that connect in the pelvis and the head. Mm-hmm. And so, again, this is someone with a ton of secondary axis tilt, hits 6 up on his driver.
I've seen it. I know what you're talking about.
And delofts it a ton. And he's like, nah, he needs to lower and slide his pelvis.
Hmm.
And I said, okay. But
Would be the opposite of what I would think he would
yeah,
do.
you generally think, nah, I probably need to trail hip high, get
Yeah.
that increase in left side bend on the trail side. He's like, no. When his hip shoots up, he just loses all the tension in those fascia. And all of a sudden, it just compresses and he just loses structure there. And he just adapts through his hands to achieve the task of hitting the ball. And so it's funny because he came down here. He worked on it really, really hard over the quarantine, just in a backyard net and then playing holes as he could. And he's just like, I've never hit it better in my life.
Wow.
And all of a sudden, his neck started rotating with his rib cage. He lost a lot of that radial in his downswing. The rate at which his left arm supinates much quieter. And he's playing great. Like, I think his scoring average is sub 70 in competition for like 12 rounds.
Did he give him like specific drills for that, or how did the information's one thing, but like how did he actually get it?
Yeah, and I think this is where Mark is so great. Like, he takes all this information in nanoseconds, and he just is one of the world's greatest communicators and conveyors of that information. It's so basic that it's outrageous. And you're just like, really? That's it? It's never complicated. And he's just like, he uses tubing beautifully. And so there were just some stuff independent, just some disassociation stuff, some pelvis awareness stuff that he prescribed him doing a wall. And then hitting balls, just doing some RNT training stuff. So like pulling his pelvis away from target and having him slide a little bit. But the stuff away from the golf ball, just kind of being in the gym and trying to keep the trail side of his pelvis down and sliding or gliding for a little bit.
Interesting.
Was massive, but it was really just two simple exercises.
Wow.
And then the kid just like worked hard, really hard. Really hard. I mean, he's just got an intense desire to play at a high level, and he has a bizarre level of trust in me. And if I put him in front of Mark, he's going to listen to Mark.
Yeah, I was going to say that just speaks of your relationship with the player.
Yeah, and I mean,
you were the conduit.
And I would extend that to the family, right? So like when you're dealing with young kids, I mean, I started working with this kid when he was 13, 14 years old. It's not just a kid, like you're part of their whole family, right?
Right.
And having the whole family on the same page and having the support of the family is massive. And in the instances where I've had that, it's gone well for sure. And and I've sent him to other people because I mean he needs contact with people. I mean, I can't just run around seeing him 3 times a year. It doesn't. You need feedback, and Brady Riggs helped him a bunch as well. So it's all good.
Yeah, that's great. What advice, because you're going to get this. I know you're probably going to be mentoring a lot of young professionals there at Balti, and I'm sure people reach out to you, but what advice do you give young coaches out there that want to get better? And because the landscape's changed, and we talked about that a little bit earlier with social media and the internet, and information is coming so fast. What are some highlights or some things that you would, I guess, give whether it's a PGM student or just a young coach that says, hey, I'm going to teach full time now. I want to start to elevate my teaching skills and career. What would you tell them?
It's interesting because I still ask people that question about me because I'm 30, 35. I still feel very young and very new at this. So I still feel very much like a beginner. And quite frankly, no one's really ever reached out or asked me anything really. As you said before the show, it's hard to find anything about me, which is fine. Henry was great. He was great. He said one thing to me. He says, Matt, invest in yourself and work your ass off.
Yeah.
And
education obviously is still paramount.
Yeah. You will never, ever lose by investing in yourself and just having a freaky work ethic. And I think I do think at some level, just being around high performers, like I got to go to the Youth Olympic Games in 2018 to coach the Canadian team. And so you're living in an athlete village there, right? So it's multi-sport. There's probably 3,000 people. It was in Argentina, Buenos Aires. And so just looking at this from a sports standpoint, like I just remember going into the gym, like it's 6 a.m. It's the first day there. And I cruise into the gym. There's only one gym. And I see this kid. He's probably 16 years old. And he's absolutely wailing away on his coach, like he's doing some form of, it wasn't boxing, I think it was Taekwondo. And they're doing this practice, and just the level of intensity was nuts. And I mean, there's a million stories of that. And so there's this underlying intensity that I think you have to really be great at something. It borders on obsession. I mean, if you think about it, high performance by definition is not normal, or extraordinary by definition is not normal. So if you're trying to, reach a really high level, I think there has to be some form of abnormal infatuation with what you're doing, and an ability to be critical, but also recognize when you do a good job as well. So you can't just be critical and tell yourself that you're not doing enough, you're not doing well enough. You have to also recognize your success. So, I mean, the big piece of advice would be love it, work really hard, invest in yourself, reflect, but also celebrate. When you have wins, or when you do a good job, it's really important to recognize them, because quite frankly, that's going to tell you a lot of stuff about yourself and about the choices you make, and consequently will help lead you to things that work.
Success leaves clues, right?
Success leaves clues.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a great point, because I mean, it's tough you can't teach passion, right? You can't teach.
No.
It's very difficult to teach motivation. I mean, we both have it because we're trying to strive to be the best that we can be in our fields. Because people ask me that question all the time, is like, what is it to be a mentor? I'm like, well, it's a two-way street, right? It's like you have to have somebody that wants to learn, and it's not, you can't force people to want to be that or do something that they don't want to do, So I think it's pretty easy to lead somebody that's passionate and wants to get better. And I'm fortunate to have two of those guys that work for me now, and push them. I don't, if I have to push them to get better, then they're in the wrong place.
Yeah. That'll be a new one for me. I've never really had that situation. So, I mean, there was an assistant who was very into teaching back in California, and he's now a director of instruction somewhere. He's a good coach, and I don't know if I mentored him at all. I mean, that's a tricky one. I don't really know what that means, other than be a really great role model and take an interest in people.
Well, there it is. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of it's modeling, right? So it's like you said, like the best piece of advice is get around other people you admire, and respect, and then you're gonna then find your own voice.
Yeah,
like you said, through research and inquiry.
Yep,
it's very good.
Yeah.
Have you had in your career or your life a failure that has set you up for later success? Any roadblocks that you would share?
Like lots that I would say are failures for sure, and roadblocks for sure. I mean, I generally think adversity is very healthy.
Yes.
And I've had plenty of it. I mean, there's, again, like poor decision making, I think, with interventions or whatnot, or even doing nothing, right? So like, do no harm doesn't mean do nothing. And so there's a lot of cases where, I think reaching out to someone or engaging an expert when I'm not certain, for example, on an intervention would have been beneficial, or consequently maybe looked at doing something when there really didn't need anything to be done. And so there's a bunch, but I mean, just the same story. I mean, so that kid with the pretty extreme motion, I remember it. I'll never forget it. He went on a recruiting trip somewhere, and I remember the coach saying to him, like, yeah, once you change this movement, man, it's going to be really good. And so he came back to me and he says, we got to change this. We got to change
Oh,
it.
geez.
And
Yeah.
I didn't know any better because I agreed. But it might have been the one thing that made him great. And worked really hard to try and do it. And no one will really know if it was the right thing. I mean, I think it has been the right thing, but it took me 5 years to find someone who could give me a definitive answer on how to do it. And to me, that's unacceptable. But again, like, I had a great relationship with the kid. He still generally performed until he got hurt. And I just consider myself lucky that the family learned with me. There's just
that's rare nowadays.
Yeah, very, very rare.
Players want to leave their coach as soon as they have a bad round.
Yeah, and so
kudos to that kid to stay with you.
Yes, and I mean that just speaks to his parents too, right? And it speaks to the character of the parents and the kids.
Yeah,
and I've always, and ever since that experience, I've been a lot more comfortable saying I don't know. I don't know. If I don't have an answer, I probably won't. I'll tell you I don't have an answer right yet. I just need to be a little more certain, and I think I'm more comfortable saying that now, and it definitely fuels me to try and find those answers, which leads me to guys like Mark.
Yeah, that's maturity too, though. I mean, I'm the same way. It's like, I mean, even sometimes it may come back to bite you, whether you're worried about looking foolish, but it's like you don't want to tell them the wrong thing.
Yeah, and you just say, look, there's two things we can do. I think this is it. We can try it. It might not be it, and it might not go well. If you're okay with that, or we can fiddle with this and go from here, and just maybe give me a little bit of time to find a better answer.
Yeah,
and generally you find out if that person's patient and wants to do it right or not.
Yeah, I like it. So give us a few details on some of your favorite, let's say, on-course games. Anything that you can share, maybe a couple, 2 or 3 that you do, like for performance drills, I guess, more than learning drills. What do you like to do with your tournament players getting ready for a tournament?
Yeah, that's interesting. On the course, I wouldn't say there are too many. One of my favorite things to do with them is go play 9 holes. I'll caddy for them, then they caddy for me. That's one interesting one. I generally feel like having an external conversation, or being able to sort of verbalize what's going on in your brain and kind of verbalize your decision-making process is extremely valuable. So that's one of my favorite things to do. Something fun that I enjoy doing from a creative standpoint is just playing battle golf. I mean, I haven't been able to do it a lot, but that's a really, really great one, in terms of just playing with a modified set, so on and so forth. But the most important thing to do with tournament players is really establish a game plan and watch them compete. And so I think that's why I was late to this call. I was going through the Carter Cup is a Met Golf Association Invitational here in the kind of New York City area, and one of the juniors that I coach is playing in it. He's a good young player, and we just go through the yardage book. They already post the pin sheets because they don't get them out on the first tee. So just being around a competitive site to develop really good habits of, do you have your green grid? Do you put your pin in? Do you go through your pins before you tee off? Do you have a game plan as to where you want to leave this ball? It all kind of goes back to being intentional. And so I would probably say I do less of on-course games as opposed to work a lot more closely and intently on developing really good pre-competition habits, as opposed to preparing for the tournament on the golf course.
Yeah, I heard you talk, I think it was in another interview, something that I enjoyed because I do the same thing, is not just doing, like, one of my favorite games is worst ball scramble. But sometimes, knowing your player and maybe that player needs a little bit more confidence, is I'll just do regular scramble with them just to get them used to making birdies. And I think you mentioned that one time. I thought that was genius because like we want to create challenge points, but a lot of times you got to be a little softer depending on the player.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I got that from an Australian guy who works in Vancouver, Brett Saunders, really good coach, and has been around a lot of the top Canadian players that you see on tour now. But just being able to go play a best ball scramble, and when you really think about it, it's scramble's really not that dissimilar from playing your regular ball. It's just maybe you get one more opportunity. But
it frees them up a little.
All of a sudden, I'm 5 under par. It's really not that different. So you start playing scramble at 18 holes, then you go 15, then 12, then 9. And then eventually you get used to shooting pretty low scores. I mean, it won't work that linearly, but it definitely provides people with an opportunity to experience under par, which is really important.
I think so too.
Yeah, you have to ultimately learn how to make or be okay with shooting really low, and not when you get to 200 par. Ooh, I just got to get it in the house. And that's, I mean, I don't know what it is, that whatever it factor is, but the ability to shoot low is certainly part of it.
Yeah, I agree. It's like getting older kids to play the red tees occasionally, right? It's like go shoot 6 under, see what it feels like.
Yeah, and then they just realize I probably just don't putt well enough.
Exactly. They shoot the same score.
That's one other thing. I mean, I know we're getting off topic here, but like,
that's all right.
Strokes gained putting. People think, well, no one really gains strokes putting because they're all good at it, generally speaking. And I think people don't necessarily recognize how good of putters really top players are. I think they're all really good at putting. And if there's one thing that I would love for every junior golfer to be, is a really good putter inside 15 feet.
Yep. 8 to 15 feet. One of my kids, he's getting ready to go to college, and he's just finally got him to start keeping strokes gained putting, and he didn't fully understand it, and came back from a tournament, and he goes, I was slick. I was like 0.5 positive. I'm like, dude, that's not even against the field. That's against PGA Tour average. You realize how good that was? It's like, you probably gained at least 2 or 3 shots on the field. He's like, wow, I never even thought about that way. Cause if they don't know, then they might think they're a poor putter if they're negative strokes gained. It's just, it's educating them on what stats are truly important, what they mean, and how they affect their score.
Yep, no doubt. Sorry, I digress. I just haven't met that many great putters, despite its clear importance.
Putting is so hard. I mean, that's what people, our average club golfers think it's easy because they just roll along the ground. It's not embarrassing, but if you're going to get serious about it, one of my new members came to a lesson the other day, and I said, well, how's your putting? He goes, it's pretty good. I go, well, how many putts are you taking per round? He goes, well, I had like 38 to 40. So that's pretty good, right? I'm like, look at the older I get, I just can't handle it. I'm like, that's not good. But he thought it was good compared to the rest of his game. That's what we're dealing with, man, at the club. All right, so let's switch topics real quick. We're going down the rabbit hole of absurdity here. So, just daily habits. I'm always curious about daily habits, and what your day looks like. And obviously, it's changed a lot now since you're with your new job. But also, like, when you feel stressed out or overwhelmed, do you have any tactics or any go-tos that you have to do to sort of make that a better day?
Yeah, good question. I'll tackle the first part first. So I love routine. And so I generally will always wake up 2 hours before my first scheduled appointment, regardless of when that is. I have a bit of a mobility circuit that I do. Like, I'll probably just throw on a podcast. Well, I should say, even the night before, like, I'm pretty regimented. I usually go to bed. I like to spend 30 minutes in bed before I go to sleep. Always sleep with a noisemaker on. And so I really try for quality sleep and try and have really good sleep hygiene, just so I can be at my best for the next day. I get up 2 hours before my first session. I do a mobility circuit. Then I will generally read a little bit, and then I will plan out my day. Like I just make this is who I have. I refer back to my notes that I keep. I have a big OneNote of kind of client files, where I look at what are they reporting, what do I observe, and what was the intervention, and then like a brief after action review, what actually happened during that session, and then any learnings that came out of that. So I'll review their notes, look at the session. I'll just make kind of one or two bullets, but I'll generally.
What do you keep that on? You keep that on your phone, on like a?
No, I do it in Microsoft Word and then I print it, so I have it in my back pocket every day.
Interesting. Okay.
So it's a bit of a rough sort of overview in terms of what I'm doing, but then there are some juniors that I see a lot and often, and so that's more of a driven supervised practice with more sort of skill-based outcomes, and that's a little more structured. And those would kind of be my big daily habits, and I try and squeeze a nap in the middle of the day. Living on property right now makes that helpful, so I leave my office.
You actually schedule, so you have to block out an hour for a nap?
I block an hour for lunch, and so I do. I come to my room here on property, I sleep for 20 minutes, and I eat lunch, and then I go teach my next lesson.
Nice.
And so from there, those are kind of be my big rocks. And then I always make sure I say goodnight to my children every night. And good morning.
I like it.
And good morning. So I get up, do my mobility, read a little bit, do my notes, eat my breakfast, and say good morning to my children because they can't cross the border. They're still in Canada.
Yeah.
And those would be my big rocks. And then how do I handle stress? Not well. And so it's definitely an area that I can and need to improve. I take I don't know why, but I take a student's struggle very personally, and for some reason I equate that to my effectiveness, because I for some reason think it should go perfectly every single time. But that's just sort of my perfectionist brain, which doesn't really align too well with how learning works. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I'll leave a session, I'll be like, God, that was so bad. Oh my goodness. And then I'll get an email the next day, like, man, I played great. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, bro.
Oh yeah.
And
that's just the high performer in you, man. That's not, I mean, everybody's like that.
So I take their struggle very personally, and I assume their goals to be mine. And maybe it's healthy, maybe it's not. But I could do a little better job in self-care in that regard for sure.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that.
If you have any strategies, I would love to hear it.
I've started meditation, which is it's a little inconsistent, but it's been pretty helpful.
I don't know if I can pay attention that long.
Yeah, well, it's like, 10 minutes, dude. I mean, it's not that long. 10, 15 minutes is the most, but
it sounds like
guided meditation with an app.
Sounds like an eternity.
Yeah, the waking up app's what I use, but that's been my new thing in the last couple of years. It's been reasonably helpful.
Yeah, I have Brain FM, and it's amazing. I sleep so great.
That's what I'm working on now. CBD works really well too.
Nice.
And then I got the Whoop band to prove it. So there you go. Yeah. So that's what I've been really tracking my sleep. But
I don't get enough exercise though. My heart rate variability is not great enough. I don't have enough strain. And so my recovery is chronically 70%.
I'm lower than that, but that's probably from other reasons. But I've been working out hard, but apparently not recovering very well. So, all right, last question. Thank you so much for your time and patience.
I feel like I feel like I glossed over too much, but I'm sorry. I'm a fast talker.
No, you're good.
And I will generally understand.
If you could get a message to the world, this is the Matt Wilson message. Put it on a gigantic billboard anywhere with anything on it. What would it be and why?
Gosh, I don't really know.
Got a favorite quote?
Yeah, mantra? I mean, there's just something I believe is that honesty is the highest form of care.
There you go.
And that's one I believe in, and whether that's honesty to yourself, honesty to others. I I just think that's a really good virtue, just to always be honest. And it's okay to not know. I mean, no one has to be perfect and all knowing. We all strive for width and depth in what we do, and just accept that it's a bit of a process, and it takes some time and it takes experience. And unfortunately, you got to screw it up a few times to ultimately get to the right answer. But be honest at all times. And when you can do that, you can move ahead.
I love it. Thank you. That's a great answer.
No worries. Thanks for having me on.
So, absolutely, man. Any social handles you want to give out? I know you're not super.
I'm not super active.
I know you're on Twitter. You're not on Instagram. You're on Twitter.
I'm on Twitter at Matt Wilson Golf. I am on Instagram at WillsMatt. But what you'll mostly find are just pictures of my children, and the odd post about golf. That should probably change. But maybe I struggle to see what I can contribute that would be over and above what seemingly everyone contributes on social media.
I'm gonna try to push you here in the future.
Well, I appreciate it. I just there are so many people who do great things and make great content, and I haven't really figured out where and how to do that in a way that I feel is very tasteful and of value. So I'm open to suggestions. But yeah, WillsMatt, WILSMATT would be my Instagram handle, and then Twitter would be at Matt Wilson Golf.
Awesome, man. Thanks so much for your time.
No, thanks for having me on. I appreciate you providing the platform, and I always love a good conversation.
What's up, everyone? Guru back here again with a couple of things before you go. First, big thank you to Matt for coming on the show and sharing his story and his incredible knowledge and insight on teaching and coaching. Make sure you give Matt a follow on the gram at WillsMatt, and on the Twitter at Matt Wilson Golf, and give him a social wave. Thanks again to our sponsors, Straight Down Apparel, NVidHemp.com, and Swing U. And make sure you use the promo code GURU20 for that 20% discount for life when you go to NVidHemp.com to take care of all your CBD needs. Then make sure you go download my app at the App Store, the Golf Guru app, and then also give me a follow on Twitter and Instagram at Golf Guru TV. That's at Golf Guru TV. Thanks so much for following. Also check out my website at golfgurutv.net, where you can find videos, articles, and more information on my teaching and coaching. And if you want to be a part of my newsletter, I send out every Friday with some extra videos and content. Please just email me at golfgurushow@gmail.com, or my personal email is golfgurutv@gmail.com, or just hit me up on the DM and give me your email and I'll add you to the email list. This show and all episodes of the Golf Guru Show are produced by myself, Jason Sutton. Music is by Kevin MacLeod and Zach Mullet. And as I leave you with every week, study, practice, teach, and then pass it on. Thanks so much for listening. I'll talk to you next time.